Hello everybody, welcome to today's session. Today we will talk about Chapter 4, Establishing a Bargaining Unit and Organizing Campaigns. So we're talking about organizing campaigns when it comes to unions. The chapter outline goes as follows: bargaining unit determination both in private as well as public sectors, union structure, public sector unions in general, the organizing drive and the process of it, union organizing strategies that are being used, and union avoidance strategies by management and employers that are being used over the past 20, 30 years. And finally, representation election procedures. So these are some of the typical topics that are discussed in this chapter. It's a very comprehensive chapter. So please pay close attention to some of the visuals and the figures that gives you an outline of what is presented here, but also it familiarizes you with the flow of the chapter and the topics in general. When it comes to bargaining unit determination, let us first define appropriate bargaining unit and what it represents. So an appropriate bargaining unit is basically the group of employees that are determined by the National Labor Relations Board to be an appropriate unit for collective bargaining purposes. After a bargaining unit is identified, the employees of that unit have the right to select their bargaining representative. It's usually a labor union and or their representatives. A bargaining unit, for the purpose of this chapter, is the particular group of employees represented by the union in collective bargaining. The basic underlying principle for the National Labor Relations Board's determination of an appropriate unit is that only employees having a substantial mutuality of interest in wages, in hours, in working conditions, can be appropriately grouped in that unit. The National Labor Relations Board considers several criteria when it comes to determining the appropriate unit. So, for example, things like community of interest, history of bargaining, desire of the employees, prior union organization, relationship of the unit to the organizational structure of the company, public interest, stipulated units, and statutory consideration. So those are some of the elements to determine what is considered an appropriate unit. There are different types of units. For example, craft unit in industrial units. Craft units are composed exclusively of workers who are having a recognized skill, a profession in their fields. They're distinct from others in the unit by virtue of the skilled, non-repetitive nature of their work. So when it comes to departmental units, they're composed of the members of one department in a larger organization. Separate units can be created after examining differences in skills, training, degree of common supervision, interchange with employees outside the department, and performance rating systems. One employer, multiple locations is another type of unit. This is where a petition for single facility unit is presumed to be an appropriate bargaining unit if the unit has a separate identity. You also have the multi-employer units. These are groups of related employers and representatives of their workers. And you have the residual units. So odd collections of workers with common work situations or proximity of work sites. In other words, they're working near or closer to each other. And then you have all the remaining units. So those would be groups that are separate from primary production in maintenance units within the organization. Craft unions can have the slogan of one craft, one union. One craft, one union. Members are organized on the basis of their craft or their skill. There are stringent apprenticeship programs, and they're basically stewards of the organization. In other words, they're the eyes and the ears of the business agent or managers or owners or stockholders. Then you have the industrial union, so their slogan can be one shop, one union. One shop, one union. So this is different from craft union, and their slogan was one craft, one union. Here with industrial unions, we have one shop, one union. The industrial unions organize workers at one workplace regardless of their jobs. So you have local unions, which are typically affiliated with a national union, and national unions may negotiate a master agreement. Local unions negotiate separate agreements covering all local issues. In terms of union structure, members often join because of union shop agreement. So these agreements are administered by elected officials. Officials typically are full-time employees in the workplace or at the organization. There are different levels of unions. So local unions in local officers, for example. Local unions are basically organizational components of the national unions. They handle the day-to-day operations of collective bargaining agreements. And then you have local officers. These officers of local unions are usually elected positions for a fixed term. In other words, 3 years, 5 years, or whatever is designated by the specific union or group of people. So for local officers, these positions often include president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, sergeant at arms, business manager, or even steward. There are national and international unions, so the relationship with subordinate local unions are determined by each union's constitution, their bylaws, and overall charter. Officers are elected to act in concert with policies that are established by the convention. And the national unions provide services to the local unions. The national unions have an important political and representative role on behalf of the local unions that they represent. The intermediate organizational unions are regional or district officers, trade councils, conference boards, and they have joint councils which often bring various crafts together. The union structure, as we mentioned a little bit in previous lectures, they are trying to change. They have some new slogans, for example, in terms of their growth and recruitment strategies. Change to Win is one of those. So a new union federation of national unions that are dedicated to growing their membership through strategic organizational campaign in improving the living standards of all workers, more specifically minorities and females in the American workplace. The independent unions, these are not designed along either the craft or the industrial unit model. They prefer to open their membership to employees of a specific professional occupation. Most public sector unions have roots in professional organizations that developed prior to the widespread public sector collective bargaining. Examples could be the NAE, the National Education Association, or IAFF, the International Association of Firefighters, the American Federation of Government Employees, and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. So how does this organizing drive with regards to unions work? This chapter gives you a good comprehensive coverage of the process. So organizing drive is a movement initiated by employees who are unhappy or dissatisfied with their managers, with their company, with their department, or with the organization overall, or it is initiated by a union organizer to submit a representation petition to the National Labor Relations Board and win a representation election, thereby providing union certification and eventually collective bargaining between the employees, union members, and the organizational managers or owners or other professionals who are working on behalf of the management. In terms of organizing process, as you're looking at this chapter, so keep in mind this visual that the authors have provided for you. So you have the initial contact by the employees or union organizer. So here, union creates strategy to organize employees, and simultaneously managers create strategy to keep unions out. So you have those people who are pro-union and then those who are against unions. So their work begins to try to obviously win for their side. And eventually you'll have representative elections. So in this case, you have step number 1, a petition is offered. Step number 2, investigation by the National Labor Board. Step 2 is investigation by the National Labor Relations Board in campaigns by both sides, management and union. And step 3 is secret ballot election. So after the first 3 steps, you have either the union is certified or the union is rejected by the employees. Again, if managers are treating their employees well and they are mostly satisfied, most likely the employees will reject it. On the other hand, if managers are not using good strategies and there's a high level of dissatisfaction between employees and their management teams, chances are they'll vote and certify the union. So if the union is certified, then you have the first contract bargaining process. This is where you have voluntary recognition by the employer, or the National Labor Relations Board directive comes in to basically force the two sides, managers and union representatives, to work and bargain with an agreement between the two sides. So there are various steps in a campaign, which include organizing committee, determination of issue of concern, choosing union recognition strategy, and holding an election. So these 4 steps are the common steps for all of you to remember in terms of what might happen, at least in the American structure, public and private sector union organizing strategies or processes. So step 1, building an organizing committee. Step 2, determining the issue. Step 3, choose a union recognition strategy. So here you have card check recognition, strike for recognition, call for an NLRB sponsored election. And number 4, union recognition status. So in step 1, you're building an organizing committee to educate coworkers about the union and to warn and educate coworkers about the impending management anti-union campaign. The organizing committee gathers basic information about the workplace, which can include the organizational structure, information about the employees, employer data and financial information, work issues of concern, and so on. So this is where you discover basically what employees don't like about the organization, and you try to use that for your campaigning to eventually become unionized. On the other hand, obviously the managers are also gathering data to try to avoid being unionized. Step 2 is determining the issues, which results in a program of union demands, the improvements they are organizing to achieve, in a strategy for the union recognition campaign. So you have a plan for highlighting the issues to the workers, which is carried out through various organizing campaign activities. And step number 3 is choosing a union recognition strategy. This is where workers are asked to join the union and support the union program by achieving union status. A union recognition strategy is selected. The choices are either a card check recognition, a strike for recognition, or an NLRB election. So those are the 3 choices: card check recognition, a strike for recognition, or a National Labor Relations Board election that takes place. Step number 4 is union recognition status. So this is gained by the signed authorization cards asking for a union election. The union campaign continues and it intensifies during the period before the election. In general, union organizing strategies can include workers initiating contact with union, or union may contact workers. Union's goal is to organize and bring workers into the union. Management's goal, on the other side, often is to keep unions out of the workplace. And it can involve voluntary recognition of union, but it is usually an election because managers will fight it to the end. You remember the terminology of salting that was used in previous lectures. So salting is the practice of union members seeking work at unorganized workplaces in order to organize them and have them upheld by the Supreme Court. So salting is sort of like basically spying or being a double agent for the union. In Dari, I believe we call it jasus, right? So salting is jasusi, being a jasus for the union members. So in union salting, members are encouraged by their union to seek employment at a non-union company. Once hired, they promote unionization. The union may supplement their regular pay to provide equity with a union wage. Salting has become somewhat less effective strategy over the recent years because, first of all, employers have initiated a policy preventing salting by not hiring anyone who adds information to their application, such as voluntary union organizer. Second, the National Labor Relations Board ruled the union violated the National Labor Relations Act by granting salts preference over other members. So this preference was for salt and for peppers. Peppers are basically people who are current employees who are hired to support the union. So again, this double agent process works where outside employees are coming into the company to basically recruit people to support union, and also union recruiting current employees who are going to be supporting the union in influencing other colleagues to support union. Third, federal court refused to hold an employer liable for refusing to consider a union applicant, even though it was motivated by anti-union animus because there was no job available. And four, the National Labor Relations Board requires a job applicant to have a genuine interest in getting a job, so thereby questioning many union salts. In other words, if somebody is just coming in to influence others so the organization can become unionized, that is not a genuine interest. Somebody who needs a job definitely wants to work for a company and make it a profession. That is a genuine interest in getting a job within that company. Union avoidance strategies by managers have got a lot of attention over the last 30 years or so. Again, when I was working in the corporate arena, we actually used many of these avoidance strategies to make sure our employees were treated fairly and that they did not vote for unions. So I worked for this company called Publix for about 16 years. I was a management development specialist and I was a manager for about 10 years. Throughout the whole time, we had a lot of campaigns to train and develop managers to obviously treat their employees well. In many workplaces, management's goal is to simply keep the unions out. The strategy is to convince the workers that unionization will do them more harm than good. And keep in mind, on top of that, the unions obviously charge a fee, a membership fee every single year. And managers may attempt to ensure workers that their present pay and benefits are competitive and may show data to prove it that they do not need the union. There are positive strategies for union avoidance and there are negative strategies for union avoidance. Positive strategies can include addressing concerns of the workers, improving communication, establishing fair grievance procedures, creating a safe and pleasant work environment for all, and providing competitive pay and benefits to all your employees. Negative strategies can include a corporate commitment to avoiding unions. And there are many organizations that are doing this. Sometimes they do this by closing a specific location where employees have elected to become unionized. So let's look at a couple of examples that are mentioned in your textbook. So in terms of union avoidance strategy, Walmart is one of the organizations that have worked very hard to keep treating their employees well so they can keep unions out of their organization. So this profile of Walmart union avoidance program tells you that Walmart is one of the largest retail companies in the world. So they have over 3 million workers right now, and they are in many, many countries around the world. They are expected to become the first $1 trillion retail company in the world in the coming years. Sam Walton opened the first Walmart in 1962 with the philosophy of service to our customers. In 1970, the Retail Clerks Union, RCU, initiated the first serious organizational campaign at Walmart stores in Missouri. So Walton hired a professional union buster called John Tate, who lectured workers on the negative aspects of union and encouraged Walton to implement a profit-sharing program so employees can obviously have more benefits in terms of their retirement and current salaries. After defeating the union, Walton hired a consulting firm to develop a union avoidance strategy. Martin Levitt describes the program as a whatever it takes to wear people down and destroy their spirit. Each manager is taught to take union organizing personally. Anyone supporting a union is slapping the supervisor in the face. In the year 2000, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union initiated a new union organizing campaign against Walmart. And actually, in this case, the union won the representation election. In the meat cutting department of Walmart in Jacksonville, Texas, became the first in the history of the company to organize a union successfully. However, 2 weeks later, Walmart announced the elimination of the meat cutting department in all of its stores and fired 4 of the workers who voted for the union. Dottie Jones, a former Jacksonville meat cutter, said Walmart managers held a meeting and told the employees there was nothing they could do. They would hold it up in court until we were old and gray. Despite Walmart's successful union avoidance programs, in recent years, workers in over 100 stores in 25 states have started organization campaigns. Why? According to Greg, an official with the UFCW union, Americans can't live on a Walmart paycheck, and Walmart is the dominant employer in the U.S., and what they pay will be the future of working people in America. The average Walmart employee earns about $18,000 a year. Only about 40% receive health care coverage, which costs employees up to about $2,800 a year plus deductibles. Another issue is the employment of women in top store positions. Although women account for 2/3 of all Walmart employees, they account for less than about 10% of the top store managers, the same percentage that it was in 1975. So in other words, women have not been receiving promotions at a higher rate than they were in 1975. So either something is preventing them from rising up to the management ranks, or there is institutional discrimination toward women, or the structure of the retail environment is set up in such a way where women have more difficulty rising up to management levels. And obviously being in management becomes very important because the salaries for managers are much higher compared to this average of $18,000 a year for a Walmart employee. So can unions successfully organize Walmart in the future? Well, not according to Bernie, a UFCW organizer in Minneapolis who claims that they will close the freaking store, or Martin Levitt, author of Confessions of Union Buster. In my 35 years in labor relations, I've never seen a company that will go to the lengths that Walmart goes to avoid a union. So this is a real-world example of a union avoidance strategy that managers and company owners actually take. It requires a lot of work. Now, Walmart would rather obviously increase the salaries of their employees to a competitive level as opposed to having unions come in and try to negotiate that. It's much easier to basically deal directly with the employees as opposed to dealing with a third party that is not necessarily looking at your best interest as a company. So, what is a union buster? So an example of a union buster is profiled in your textbook as well. So this is an example of Peter List. So Peter's job title is not union buster, but that is how many of his colleagues in employers refer to him. So Peter List is hired by employers to persuade workers not to join a union because it is not in their best interest. His background is surprising. For 8 years, his career was handling heavy spools of telephone cable on the factory floor of an AT&T factory in Phoenix, Arizona. He joined the Communications Workers of America his very first week at AT&T, rose to the ranks of chief shop steward within the union, and edited the local union newspaper. However, today, Peter List is hired to fight union organizing campaigns, and in 2003, he won 32 of 35 campaigns. Peter List estimates that 60 to 70% of his clients are small business owners because unions have sought to organize more small businesses in recent years, and he averages about 57% win rate against them. So why did Peter List switch sides? The profile continues that in 1992, AT&T outsourced his job to Mexico, and thus he went back to college to complete a degree in labor relations. In his senior year, he had an epiphany when researching a thesis on the history of unions. Peter List decided unions blamed their decline on anyone but themselves. He developed a strong pro-capitalist ran philosophy of radical individualism and opposed all governmental regulations of labor relations. Peter List started his own company, the North American Employer Group, which advises employees and employers who are engaged in an organized campaign. For example, in 2001, the Teamsters collected authorization cards from a majority of 35 employees at Mazza & Sons in Tinton Falls, New Jersey. The recycling and demolition firm had hired a SALT, or Teamster member, who began organizing from the inside. The company had not given workers a raise in several years and thus was somewhat vulnerable because, again, employees were not making as much money as they would have liked, especially if other people were getting raises in their competition and these employees were not. So therefore, the employees obviously become somewhat dissatisfied. The Teamsters began picketing Mazza & Sons and created what Dominic Mazza called a battle zone that disrupted business. Mazza called Peter List, who immediately started distributing handouts to the employees. Peter List also coached Mazza on what he legally could and could not say or do during the organizational campaign. He emphasized that a manager or owner should never spit on workers. So spit in this case is do not spy, do not promise, do not interrogate, and do not threaten your employees who are thinking or talking about organizing. In addition, Peter List emphasized that managers should explain certain critical facts, like the following. If a union is certified, management is under no obligation to sign an agreement. If negotiations reach an impasse, management has the right to impose its final offer unilaterally. And if the workers strike, management can hire permanent replacement workers. So after a few months, the picketing stopped and the Teamsters lost interest in Mazza & Sons. So hiring a union buster or somebody who helps you avoid the unions is a good strategy. But you got to make sure that these consultants are experienced people who know what unions want, how they will organize, and obviously, you have to know the law in terms of what you can and cannot do, as you see in this profile example. Overall, like we used to conduct training with corporate managers when I worked for Publix, and keep in mind Publix is currently one of the largest supermarkets in the United States. They have over 200,000 employees. So you see, this is one of the stores where I worked. I was a department manager. And with 200,000 employees, unions would love to be working with those employees. So with 200,000 employees, unions would love to be representing them. In other words, they would have more members, obviously, if they're representing a big company like Publix or Walmart or Target or others who have thousands and thousands of employees. So you have to remember that there are a lot of things that managers cannot do. So in your textbook, the authors offer you tips in FORE in campaigns. So tips, these are things that managers cannot do. You cannot threaten, you cannot interrogate, you cannot promise, and you cannot spy on employees regarding their union activities at your organization. And also, they give you the acronym FORE. So that would be focusing on facts, opinions, rules, and experience. So in other words, things that managers can do to discourage unionization is basically the acronym FORE. So in this case, you're focusing on facts. You can offer your opinion to employees in terms of what may happen if the company is organized and votes for unionization. You can explain the rules, and you can discuss your personal experiences with your employees. Also, as part of the union avoidance strategy, companies get involved in counter-salting steps. So this is where employers pre-screen as many applicants as possible to ensure that they're hiring the most qualified person for any opening that they have available. They can use a consensus interviewing process by teams where 2, 3, or 4 employees are interviewing a person to see which candidate might be the best person for that organization. An application should say list entire employment history starting with the present employer. So if the person mentions that he or she worked for a union, let's say 15 years ago, then that person could be a SALT. You might have to ask more questions. What did you do? What did you learn? What are your views? Were you involved with the unions in terms of administrative capacity? So again, it leads you to ask more questions to make sure you're not hiring a SALT. Ensure that applications show entire work history with no gaps in employment, and check references thoroughly. When it comes to organizing at the workplace, the National Labor Relations Board and the courts have devised rules to balance the right to engage in organizational campaigns in and around the workplace and employers' right to maintain a work environment. For example, there are rules regarding distributing union materials, union buttons or insignias, bulletin boards, meeting halls and mailboxes, email solicitation, no solicitation policy, etc. So again, you can use obviously these rules and policies that the NLRB has to your advantage by being aware of them as managers and employees. When it comes to picketing during organizational campaign, the target employer is the primary employer. Under the Act, a union can picket a primary employer, but only 30 days before being required to file a petition for an election with the National Labor Relations Board. Mass picketing, violence, or threats of violence are not allowed, nor is secondary picketing. So what are the main steps for representation election? What are the procedures? Step 1, representation petition. Step 2, investigation. Step 3, secret ballot election. And step 4 is certification of election results. In step 1, representation petition, so the RC petition is filed on behalf of the employers or union to determine support for representation in collective bargaining or certification. Then the RM petition is filed by employer to determine support for representation in collective bargaining. And the RD petition is filed by employer employee or union to determine whether a recognized union still has employee support, otherwise known as decertification. This form from the United States Government National Labor Relations Board petition is a good starting point to see what kind of information is needed and how the process works. So as you can see here, the RC, RM, RD, UD, UC, AC are all defined based on this form according to the United States Government NLRB petition. So look at this form and read the chapter closely if you're going to be involved in a company that is unionized, or you're going to be a manager in a company that is unionized, or obviously you want to start your own union in the United States or in Afghanistan. So some of these rules and policies should be helpful. So RC is certification of representative. RM is representation. This is employer petition. RD is decertification, removal of representative. UD is withdrawal of union shop authority or removal of having the obligation to pay member dues. UC is unit clarification, and AC is amendment of certification. So as you're reading the chapter, it's good to know the acronyms and what they stand for, especially if you're going to be involved in union activities. Step 2 is the investigation. So this is where the National Labor Relations Board regional director determines whether to conduct an election. They check appropriateness of bargaining unit. An employer must provide list of eligible employees' names, addresses to petitioning union. In step 3, the secret ballot election, the National Labor Relations Board ensures that representation election is fair and honest and gives employees free choice. The election may be invalidated due to actions of the employer, employees, or even third parties. And there's sometimes runoff election. So runoff elections can be used if more than one union is seeking representation rights, if none of the choices receives a majority of the vote. And finally, step 4 is certification of the election results. So this is where NLRB is satisfied that results reflect the employee's free choice. In other words, a majority of the employees have voted to become unionized. This certification has a variety of benefits to the unions. So unions get exclusive representation rights. For 1 year, employer is obligated to bargain. A 2005 study found that 90% of newly certified unions successfully negotiated the first contract within the first year. However, in previous decades, union rates were as low as 60%. For 1 year, no other union can challenge representation rights. So those are some of the benefits of certification to the union. Voluntary recognition means card checks or strike. This is where an employer recognizes the union without an election. It may result from union pressure techniques. And here we have the Giselle doctrine. So the National Labor Relations Board may issue a bargaining order in response to the employer's unfair labor practices. So when the NLRB issues a bargaining order in response to the employer using some unfair labor practices, that's called the Giselle doctrine. Traditional remedies deemed inadequate to eradicate effects of employer techniques and union authorization cards are considered a more reliable indicator of the employee sentiment about union representation. So this is why it's so important that managers know exactly what to do and what not to do when it comes to trying to avoid unions in their organizations. There are some prohibited conducts during an election. For example, campaign propaganda and misrepresentations are not allowed. Threats and loss of benefits is not allowed. Promise or grants of benefits is not allowed. Interrogation and pulling of employees is not allowed. Surveillance is not allowed. Polling activity is not allowed. So managers have to be very careful to follow the rules. The decertification election is the process of removing a union as the certified representative of employees within a bargaining unit. A secret ballot election is conducted by the National Labor Relations Board to determine a majority opinion. If most of the employees vote against the union, then they become decertified in that bargaining unit or that organization. Obviously, will avoid unions. Factors present in situations in which unions are decertified include employer recently treated employees better, employer waged an aggressive anti-union campaign, employer moves to traditionally non-union geographical areas. So if managers are changing their ways and becoming effective, fair, ethical, moral leaders, then employees would appreciate that and they might vote against the union and they would become decertified. So a couple of other elements are that the union is perceived by a majority of its members as being unresponsive. And finally, female, minority, and younger workers lose confidence in the union leaders, in their overall image. Let us talk about representation elections in the public sector. Public sector employers may not be able to prohibit non-employee union agents access to the workplace because the workplace is a public area. So in a private sector, you can tell people to leave the premises. In a public sector, we can't always do that because every citizen has a right to be in that organization for a legitimate reason or cause. In general, the rules that govern public employer pre-election activities during an organizational campaign generally mirrors that of the private sector restrictions, the do's and don'ts. However, the public sector, again, because people are citizens of the specific city or area, then people have a right to come in and talk openly. Where in a private sector, there are more limitations. But nonetheless, generally speaking, the restrictions are very similar for managers. Exclusive representation basically means both a practice and a principle of the law, gives real power to the union's bargaining position, simplifies the bargaining process, facilitates consistent administration of the labor contract. In summary, let us go ahead and make some conclusions. Keep in mind that there are specific rules that employers and union organizers must follow during any organizational campaign. Number one, employees may solicit union support on the employer's property during off-work time. Number two, non-employees cannot solicit union support on employer's property if there are other ways to reach employees like email, websites, radio, television ad, and so on that might be very conveniently done. Third, employees may not solicit public areas of an employer's property. 4, union buttons or insignia may not be worn if it would incite a disturbance. 5, bulletin boards and meeting halls can be used by employees for union activities if the employer allows access for other employee programs. In terms of comparing bargaining unit determination in the public and private sectors, we can say that at the federal level, the federal law applies a community of interest test to identify an appropriate unit on an agency, plant, installation, functional, or other basis. Confidential employees, managers, supervisors, and personnel employees are excluded from the bargaining unit. A community of interest test is also used in state and local governments that recognize the right of the public employees to organize. However, as many states recognize only specific groups of employees who might become organized, like teachers, police officers, firefighters, determining an appropriate unit is generally moot. However, when necessary to define community of interest in the public sector, the following criteria have been developed by the Advisory Committee on Intergovernmental Relations. Number one, similar wages, hours, working rules, and conditions of employment. Number two, maintaining a negotiating pattern based on common history. Number three, maintaining the craft or professional line status. And number four, representation rights, which involve the inclusion or exclusion of supervisors or non-professionals. And this refers to the organizations such as police or even fire departments. Let us look at the respective roles of the four levels of the unions: local, national, intermediate, and federation. When it comes to local union, we can say that unionized workers are members of a local union which handles the specific day-to-day operations of the collective bargaining agreement, disposes of most grievances, manages strikes, and disciplines the members. A local union may fill a social role in the lives of its members, sponsoring dance activities, festivals, gatherings, and other functions that may need to be conducted on a day-to-day or week-to-week or month-to-month basis. The national union provides services to the locals, and the fundamental relationship is based on the services that are rendered. Services can include organizing the non-union workers within the jurisdiction of the local union. In appropriate circumstances, the national union negotiates master agreements with nationwide employers and then assists the local union in negotiating a local agreement. A national union provides support in strike activities. The intermediate organization unions consist of regional or district officers, trade councils, conference boards, and joint councils lie between national and local unions. For industrial unions, the intermediate office serves to bring the national office closer to the local unions to provide better services. For craft unions, joint councils often bring the various crafts together to give them better negotiating power with the local construction employers, to coordinate their activities, and also to assist in resolving jurisdictional disputes between various craft unions. At the federation level, we can say that federations are formed to increase the power of the union. The AFL-CIO represents United States labor and world affairs and coordinates union activities such as lobbying, voter registration, and political education. The mission statement of Change to Win is organizing targeted workers and to involve itself in less political activities than the AFL-CIO. What is union security? Union security refers to the union's ability to grow and to perform its exclusive collective bargaining role without interference from management, other unions, or even other sources. One essential element to a union security is the requirement in a collective bargaining agreement that all workers be required to join a union as a condition of employment. Union leaders feel union security is important because a union is only recognized as an exclusive bargaining agent through employee elections, and without loyalty built through participation, this type of elections would be hard to win. Union security provisions guarantee the union a steady source of income to continue its work and increase its bargaining power. Let us look at some tips from the experts for the unions and for the managers. Let's look at the union first. A union organizer can generate sufficient interest at a workplace to organize employees in three following ways. Organizing at the workplace is not much different from organizing in the community or campus or anywhere else for that matter. The key to successful organizing efforts is finding the connection between the prospective members and the organization seeking their allegiance. For employees, traditionally this connection was easy. Better compensation for their labor, health benefits, and job security. Today, this connection must be based on other things as well. The basics exist for many workers, whether by existing collective bargaining or by legislation. The basics do exist. The emphasis must shift to, number one, employment security, number two, employee-employer partnership in providing quality products and quality services, and number three, employee political power in the elective and legislative processes. So it is necessary to find out what the workers want and to show them how the union is the right vehicle for attaining what they really want. Now, tips from the experts for management include the following. There are 3 ways that an employer can legally discourage employees from organizing. So number 1, you can have a good communication program to allow employees to make some suggestions, and obviously to have various reward programs to tell employees you appreciate them and their innovation and creativity and productivity in the workplace. In regards to reward programs, employees can compete for the best ideas for cost cutting or similar measures to simply training supervisors on how to best field questions and issues around which union organizing attempts focus, and how to proclaim the company's union-free philosophy without interrogating the employees in the process. Second is active participation from joint employee management quality teams dealing with specific workplace issues to bonus incentives for every employee when both the company and the individual employee exceed their performance objectives, to employee representation in the development of critical personnel policies. And third is to have a good grievance appeals process for employees. In terms of application, can these guidelines apply to private and public sector employees in Afghanistan? Perhaps some of them can be applicable to the Afghan culture and some may not be, but some can be adapted to match the local culture, the local environment, and the Afghan constitution. Keep in mind overall that employees have a right to organize. However, any organizing effort should be within the legal, ethical, and universal guidelines in any culture, any country, any company, any city in the world. The law should grant employees the rights to be represented by an organizing body, by a union, if they choose to do so. The lesson is that managers should treat their employees well. Otherwise, sooner or later, workers will collectively organize and work against them. So the lesson here is that managers should treat their employees well, ethically, fairly, and morally. Otherwise, sooner or later, those employees will find a way to organize and collectively bargain with the managers and the owners. If that doesn't work, they'll simply go and join the competition and fight against you. So let us now conclude by emphasizing some of the do's and don'ts in organizing campaigns with regards to unions. What is it that you can and cannot do? What is it that you should or should not do when it comes to unions trying to get your employees to organize? So we talked about tips, which was do not threaten, do not interrogate, do not promise, and do not spy on your employees. So we'll talk about tips and also FORE, things that you cannot do and things that you can do as managers. So when it comes to tips, first of all, do not threaten or imply that the company will take adverse action of any kind for supporting the union. Don't threaten to terminate an employee because of their union activities. Don't threaten to close the facility if a union is voted in. Don't threaten to transfer employees to another location because of their union affiliation. Don't threaten employees with a loss of their wages or salaries and benefits during the negotiation process. Don't threaten employees with the loss of their job if they sign a union authorization card. Don't threaten employees by saying, with the union there will be a strike. Don't threaten to penalize employees who actively support the union for violation of company policies that non-union employees are permitted to commit without being disciplined. Don't make work assignments with the intent of causing an employee who has been active on behalf of the union to quit his or her job. Don't take any action that is intended to impair the employee's job or pay because of his or her activity on behalf of the union. Don't intentionally assign work or transfer employees so that those who are active on behalf of the union are separated from those that you believe are not interested in the union. And finally, don't reduce hours of work with the intention of curtailing the union's strength of organizing. Second step, don't interrogate or ask employees their position concerning unions. Don't ask employees how they're going to vote in an election. Don't ask employees if they or anyone else signed a union authorization card. Don't ask employees if they're going to the union meeting or who else may be attending. Don't ask employees their opinion of the union organizer. And finally, don't visit employees' homes for the purpose of asking questions about the union or urging them to reject the union. Third step, don't promise employees a pay raise, better benefits, or special favors if they vote against the union. Don't promise employees a promotion if they vote against the union. Don't promise employees that all the concerns they brought to management before the election will be corrected to their advantage if they vote against the union. And don't engage in favoritism of employees who are anti-union. And fourth, don't spy on any union activities the employees may be involved in, such as attending a union meeting. And don't attend a union meeting even if you are invited. So these are some of the responsibilities for you as a manager in terms of not being involved. So we call that tips. Don't threaten, don't interrogate, don't promise, and don't spy on employees' union activities. So what is it that you can do as managers? So experts call this FORE. Focus on facts, opinions, rules, and your experience. So let's talk a little bit more about FORE. Things that you can do as managers to discourage unionization in your organization or in your department. So first, focus on facts. Do tell employees that by signing a union authorization card, they may have authorized the union to become their legal representative in all matters pertaining to their salaries, the working hours, and the working conditions in your organization or in your department. Do tell employees that if they sign a union authorization card, it does not mean that they must vote for the union in an election. An election is a secret ballot process where nobody knows who voted yes and who voted no. Do tell employees that if a union is voted in, everything, including their wages, their benefits, and their working conditions, would go on the bargaining table. So they could get more, or they could get the same, or they could get less as a result. So regardless, they will be responsible for dues, fees, fines, and assessments. Do tell employees that they can actively campaign against the union. However, you as a manager cannot be involved with them. You cannot participate in it with them simply because you are a manager. In terms of opinion, do tell your employees that management does not believe the employees need a third-party representation. Do tell employees that management believes in the open door policy and that managers are willing to discuss any subject with the employees. And they should feel free to come in through those open doors. In regards to rules, do tell employees that the law permits the company to permanently replace them if there is a strike. Do tell employees that the union cannot make the company agree to anything it does not want to during negotiations. And finally, in regards to experience, feel free to share any of your own personal experiences that you may have had with a unionized workplace. Whether it was positive or negative, feel free to share that with the employees. It is something that you can do to discourage employees from joining or voting for a union representation in your department or in your company. Ultimately, feel free to treat your employees with the respect that they deserve every single day. If they feel they're being treated fairly, ethically, morally, and with respect, they will not want union representation because your door is open and they should come and talk to you about any problems, any challenges that they experience. Good luck.